Hello and welcome to the Friday, January 8th, 2020 edition of On Iowa Politics. This week, a failed coup attempt and the legislature returns. They're not the same. Well, not necessarily. Hi, I'm James Lynch of the Cedar Rapids Gazette, and with me today are Bret Hayworth of the Sioux City Journal. Good morning, Bret.
Morning, James.
Tom Barton of the Quad City Times. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, James.
Erin Murphy, Newspapers Statehouse Bureau Chief. Good morning, Erin.
Good morning, James.
And Gazette Opinion Editor Todd Dorman. Good morning, Todd.
Good morning.
You can find us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to On Iowa Politics on iTunes and Stitcher or wherever you find your podcast. First up, a failed coup. The orderly transition of power hit a pothole Wednesday when thousands of Trumpistas descended on Washington to show their support for the supreme ruler and disdain for the democratic process. Orange Kool-Aid was served. The coup, if that's what they intended, failed. In the end, it seemed to have the opposite effect. Some members of Congress who had planned to object to the results of the Democratic elections that have been vetted by election officials and courts decided, after hiding under their desks, to support the certification of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as the next president and vice president. All's well that ends well, right, Todd?
Well, not exactly. What we've seen since is a lot of questions raised about why the Capitol was so lightly defended by the Capitol Police and why in the summer when there were Black Lives Matter protests, the Capitol area looked like an armed military camp. But when these angry white guys stormed up the steps and broke windows and crashed their way in, it didn't seem like there was as much resistance to what they were trying to accomplish, and that was take over the Capitol, which seems like a fairly serious offense. So there are those questions. There's, since then, obviously the president spoke to these folks before they went to the Capitol, and he basically told them to go to the Capitol and gave his usual shtick about how the election had been stolen from him, and Congress was now going to be an accomplice in that theft, and you should go up there and, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, do what you need to do. And so they did. And now there are people calling for the president to be removed, for him to resign, impeached. He's only got about, 12 days now left in office, but that display made people wonder what could happen next. And his advisors finally got him to come out and say that, the new administration would be coming on. He didn't really concede. He just sort of grudgingly finally accepted reality. So, yeah, I think the implications of this are, still happening, yet to be seen. How much damage did it do to the Republican Party that has sort of coddled Trump for 4 years, and that coddling by, anyone's objective analysis led us to the Wednesday, sacking of our Capitol and violence, and people died. So that's I don't think we've yet figured out where this is going to lead American politics, but I think it was a very bad day for Republicans, especially those that had planned to join the effort to pretend that the election wasn't free and fair.
I think enabling is a good word, right?
Enabling, yeah, exactly. That's
yeah. In the end, Iowa's 6-member delegation, 5 Republicans and a Democrat, voted to certify the results. There didn't seem to be any question that Senator Chuck Grassley and Representatives Ashley Hinson, Marinette Miller-Meeks, and Cindy Axne would support the certification. Joni Ernst only said that prior to the vote that she was hearing from Iowans and would carefully consider her decision. So we don't know what her plans were before the mob invaded the Capitol. Bret, Randy Feenstra seemed to be one of those who it appeared that he was willing to side with those calling for an investigation of voting irregularities. Did the mob change his mind?
No, he still, in his release that he put out that, I guess it was late that evening, Wednesday night, he of course spoke against the violence that was happening, and said things need to calm down, and we need to be better than this. But then he did add onto that he does want that investigation to happen. Cited how there's sorry, I want to look at the email that he wants to improve trust in election systems, such as implementing strict voter ID laws like we have here in Iowa. That's why I signed on to a letter with my freshman colleagues urging House leadership to take action and support the integrity of our election process. And I did want to say that, so yesterday we at the Journal, several of us reporters worked cooperatively to talk to a whole host of people that are politically affiliated or just kind of city metro leaders for like how we move. Basically, the question we asked them was how we move forward. And several of them were bringing up this issue of election integrity. So I think that's definitely going to be an issue that's still top of mind for especially Republicans, that because there was just so much that was said, by Trump, going way back to summer about mail-in ballots, and then, all the way up through the election, and that is now still after. And I guess our question was, how do we move forward? And these people, the way they took, that could be answered in, however many different ways, depending on, your view on that. But that this is a lasting thing, that there, for a lot of people, election integrity, it really is called into question, and they highly question that, that there are the safeguards that need to be there.
Which is really interesting considering how, how many of these election results have been vetted by the courts, and there have been recounts and audits and everything else. But people.
Yeah, I saw Chuck Grassley had a release out. I think it came from his campaign site, if I remember an email I think I saw this morning. But he cited how, I think he said, unfortunately, 38 of these court cases didn't make it. Mm-hmm. But I think the way he worded it was not quite right, because I think they were, 38 of those were thrown out. It wasn't like they didn't make it. It was like they were basically dismissed at, on almost unceremoniously right off the bat, before they even got into a full hearing. So,
the parsing of words is very interesting in some of these statements coming out of elected officials and party officials. Tom, Eastern Iowa Congresswoman, before I go to you, Tom, I just want to point out that Randy Feenstra did vote to certify the election results in the end, despite sort of uncertainty before that. Tom, Eastern Iowa Congresswomen Ashley Hinson and Marionette Miller Meeks, both freshmen, stated earlier in the week that they didn't believe Congress had constitutional authority to overturn the results, state election results. However, both seemed like, we were just talking about Grassley, gave credence to the claims of voting irregularities around the country. Were they trying to have it both ways, being right constitutionally, while at the same time being right politically? In terms of their parties?
Yeah, that definitely seems to be the case. And, Marionette Miller Meeks, largely echoed what Randy Feenstra had to say. She continued to echo that there was fraud, and that there was irregularities in the voting that needs to be investigated. She did her best yesterday to try and dodge her party and the president's culpability in the storming of the Capitol yesterday, while Chuck Grassley and Joni Ernst said that Trump displayed poor leadership and bears some responsibility for the violent siege at the U.S. Capitol. So Miller Meeks, who joined Congress provisionally this week while her election is being contested, continued to condemn the mob violence, but again, echoed the president's claims of fraud in the election without offering evidence, and said that there's plenty of blame to go around to all of us, and suggested that if Democrats weren't blamed or held accountable for summer violence tied to racial injustices, that Trump and Republicans shouldn't be blamed for the Capitol riot. And also said Thursday that she thinks that Trump should finish out his term, saying that removing him wouldn't help heal our nation, and that, quote, to go through another impeachment process, I think, would create a bigger wedge and divide our country, she said. Went on to say that it's time for compassion, it's time for understanding. But yeah, I mean, in the end, she did object, reject objections challenging Joe Biden's electoral college victory, saying that constitutionally, Congress didn't have the authority to overturn state election results. So it seems like, yeah, she's trying to have it both ways: support a peaceful transition of power, condemn the violence while not alienating her base, and still trying to argue that there are legitimate questions out there about election integrity that need to be properly heard and investigated. Again, despite the fact that, as Bret said, a lot of these challenges were unceremoniously thrown out or roundly rejected by the courts for lack of evidence and merit.
Erin, all the rhetoric wasn't coming from Congress. We saw some testy, sharply worded exchanges between Republican Party of Iowa Chairman Jeff Kaufman and the Iowa Democratic Party over who is responsible for this. And Trump carried Iowa, and folks like Hinton, Miller Meeks, Ernst, and GOP legislative candidates probably owe some part of their success to his coattails. Kaufman, condemned the violence, but will the party denounce Trump and his role in this?
They have not yet, so I don't know if they haven't in these past, what's it been, 48 hours, 5 years, whatever it's been since Wednesday. If they haven't yet, I don't know why they all of a sudden would. So I don't expect that. The plan, the strategy seems to be, and we heard Governor Kim Reynolds say this week when she was asked about it. The plan seems to be to suggest that it was an ugly thing, but we all need to move on from it and not try and point fingers or place blame. I'm gonna remember that if I'm ever, caught robbing a bank or cheating on my wife or something. I'm just gonna say, hey, let's not point fingers and place blame here. I think it would be better for all of us if we just move on and forget about it and try to come together now.
Just blame on both sides. I mean, let's be honest.
There are good people on all sides. Yeah.
So I don't think it's going to be quite that simple. There's I think a reckoning that's coming with the end of this presidency, and I do think it needs to be discussed in our public square and in our politics, and maybe even in our weekend political columns. Hint, hint. I think for those folks, and there are plenty of them here in Iowa who have supported this president over the past 4 years, sometimes vociferously and with great bombast. They're hoping that finally the end of this protracted election drama and the pending inauguration of Joe Biden, it seems like they want to just kind of turn the page and not look back. And I don't know that that's going to happen, nor do I know that that would be the healthiest thing.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that I recall back in, I think it would have been 1976, that the Minnesota Republican Party, in the wake of Watergate and Richard Nixon, changed the name of the party to the Independent Republican Party. I remember that people made a lot of fun of that, saying it's like being agnostic Lutheran or something, that you can't be independent and a Republican at the same time. But I find it hard to believe that any state Republican Party will take that sort of a move, you know, to sort of separate themselves from Trump in the wake of all this. But it'll be interesting. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to the Republican Party, because, you know, we're seeing people, you know, breaking. Jim Nussle the other day, a former Iowa congressman, just said, "I'm no longer a Republican." You know, I think there are probably a lot of people who feel that way. And, you know, you can go back to Election Day, and there apparently were a lot of former Republicans who felt that way and just kind of bring themselves to vote for Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, and it's going to be, and this is a secondary concern to the health of our democracy, but it will be interesting in the coming years too for Republican elections, because that base is still there, and as my inbox can attest, it's not going anywhere. So those folks are still going to be there. They're going to be a factor, I would assume, in Republican primary elections in 2 years. So you have the elected class, quote unquote, for lack of a better way of putting it, that is trying to distance themselves from the president, but you still have a segment of that voting base that's still very much there. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out within the party as well.
Well, in talking to congressional staffers in Iowa, you know, the Iowa delegation's offices, they talked about intense pressure that they were getting, that the members of Congress were getting to object to the election results. And if you read the social media streams, you know, of Miller Meeks and Hinson and these other folks, it's pretty clear there are people out there who believe the allegations of election fraud and lies about the election being stolen from Trump. They're already calling these people traitors, rhinos, saying they'll never vote for them again. They're going to be one-term members of Congress. So you're absolutely right. You know, Erin, that base is still out there. Now, if Trump leaves quietly, does all that die down? If Trump leaves quietly is a big question. You know, if he decides to go to Scotland and play golf, that's probably good for the democracy here. But you know, if he sticks around and announces he's going to run for president in 2024, or starts his own you know, cable news network or whatever, and
he's been throwing out, like, adjacent to us here in South Dakota, like, prospect of primarying the people that would, you know, potentially would not have stood up for him, you know, at the vote on Wednesday, you know, like, hey, Kristi Noem, the governor, she's going to run against you, John Thune, you know, like, throwing that stuff out and stirring the pot that way.
Sure. So I think there's a lot here that remains to be seen. I guess I want to come back to you, Todd. You know, I asked you, all's well that ends well. Is this the end? Or is this just like the beginning of a new chapter here? And I guess, where does it leave, you know, these Congress, and especially these freshman congressmen and women? You know, can they move on?
Well, in a perfect world, it would leave them to consider whether, you know, wholeheartedly backing a dangerously unfit president was a good idea. It might leave them to wonder whether, you know, spouting lies to your base about voter fraud is the best way to govern a country. We saw where that got us. And, you know, and they've just joined the legislative branch of government. And, you know, you have to question what respect they have for it if they want to let the executive branch go scot-free after it had ordered an attack on the legislative branch. I mean, that's pretty serious stuff to just sort of sweep under the rug. But I know they're going to try to do it. I think what they'll actually do is try to find ways to re-ingratiate themselves to the mob, which is going to be ugly. And of course, the kind of politics that we're used to. I wish this would have been a moment of reckoning, but seeing what they're saying now after a couple of days, I'm not sure that that's going to happen. I mean, we're hearing the both sides have problems, and there's still election irregularities, even though it's this garbage about election irregularities that drove those people into the Capitol. And they're still spouting it. And it's, you know, and it's, you know, there just doesn't seem to be any desire to sort of step back and say, what have we done here? What's happened? what have we done to the country? It's just like, let's just do some damage control and hopefully get past it and, hold our seats and win at all costs, just like we've tried to do, during the Trump years. So it's sad that there hasn't been a lesson learned, but I hope maybe there are some voters out there who maybe voted for Trump or supported him for various reasons who now realize that was a bad idea. And I think there probably are, but you do have the base that's still out there. I mean, obviously, I think I got a 4 F-bomb email today about an editorial we ran saying that the president needed to go now. So, yeah.
The one Tom and I got the other day was at least nice enough. We got the F-bomb, but then it was signed off with "Have a great day" or something to that effect. So that was a nice
Iowa
180
nice.
there at the end.
Yeah, that's Iowa nice.
Right.
Yeah, right. That's what it passes for.
Exactly. Well, we're going to move on here and put the past behind us and look ahead at the Iowa Legislature, which will convene Monday in Des Moines. Not sure if there'll be any mobs there or not. Apparently, there will be no restrictions on who can enter the Capitol as long as your temperature isn't over 98.6. Hundreds of lawmakers, staffers, and lobbyists and a few journalists will be gathering at the Capitol despite the safety concerns and COVID concerns. Erin, legislative leaders have announced protocols this week that are consistent with the philosophy of the Republican Party, that is, take personal responsibility as opposed to a communal responsibility. What safety measures will be in place to protect all these folks there?
So I will give the credit when it's due, and they have tried to take some steps. They've tried to do what they can in some ways to limit the number of people who will be working in the chamber. It's like some of their staff will work in other areas of the Capitol, if not other buildings altogether, so they don't have more people on the floor. They're trying to find the biggest rooms possible to operate in the Capitol when they have committee hearings or hold those committee hearings on the floor itself when that's possible. Bless their hearts to protect the media. They're kicking them off of the chamber floor and into the gallery. So that warms your heart. But there are some reasons, some legitimate reasons for concern that you laid out there, starting with there's not going to be any kind of cap on. And look, I get there's a fine line that they had to thread here between, you start to tell people that they can't come to the Capitol. Well, now you're in trouble for not operating government in a transparent way. So I get that there wasn't maybe a perfect or super easy solution here. But from a public health standpoint, that's definitely concerning that, if anyone can come to the Capitol and as many people as want to, like you said, as long as they have the right temperature, which we know isn't a perfect predictor of whether a person has COVID. Maybe the most concerning things to me were the lack of a face mask mandate, which again just continues to fly in the face of all sense of reason. The justification for that was, we can't enforce it, and we're going to leave that up to the individual. And I think by now, 10 or whatever months into this thing, we are now that we've seen that those excuses don't hold water, and we've seen how effective face mask policies can be, even if you don't enforce them. Just having the policy in place can be effective. And then the other one is that if anyone who works at the Capitol has a confirmed case of COVID, they're not required to acknowledge that, or the word's escaping me here, they're not disclosed. They're not required to disclose that, which again, citing privacy reasons and again, the fact that they can't enforce it, which I guess again is fair. You can put that policy in place, but you're still requiring the person, still needs the person adhere to that policy. It just seems like the kind of thing that you should still have in place to just kind of signal to the folks that this is serious. We're taking it seriously. We want you to take it seriously. The idea, and look, and I presented this suggestion to Jack Whitfer, Senate Majority Leader Jack Whitfer, and House Speaker Pat Grassley, and they kind of pushed back at the notion. But look, the reality is you have created a situation where someone could have COVID and come to the Capitol and not tell anyone about it, and walk around and not wearing a face mask. I mean, that's the reality. You know, you can say, oh, we don't believe anyone would actually do that. Okay, I hope you're right. So there are steps they've taken, but there's definitely some holes.
Yeah, it was interesting listening to the legislative leaders this week talk about how they would strongly urge their caucus members to wear face masks and shields, and it kind of reminded me of that scene from what is it? The Jack Nicholson, Tom Cruise,
A Few Good Men.
A Few Good Men. Yes.
Oh, I strongly object.
I strongly object.
Oh, well, then.
Yes, I strongly urge my members. And you know, the reality is that some of the, some members will wear face masks, but there are members of the Republican caucus who are probably going to say, like, I know this is really going to piss off Democrats that I don't wear a face mask. So
Absolutely.
I'm not going to wear a face mask, it's just they can enforce a rule that says you must wear a tie in the Senate chamber, but they can't enforce a rule that says you must wear a face mask. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense.
Yep.
But
also, if that's their goal is to strongly recommend something, I have a suggestion that's very similar to a strong recommendation. Is a requirement.
Yeah.
Well, I think, in order for them to be really fair about this, they should have had Tyson come in and set up their safety system. And maybe then we could also have a pool to how many legislators are going to get COVID. So I think that's
which one will be first.
Why protect the legislature more than the average citizen, I guess. The average worker on the meat line.
And with sports betting in Iowa, they get easily set up all sorts of, bets on who will go down first, how many, exactly.
Yeah.
I tell you, the funnel date might take on a whole new meaning this session.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Bret, getting serious here. You've talked to a lot of legislators in your area, and I'm just curious whether there's any consensus among them about what should be done, what they will get done, or is it just a matter of being split along party lines as usual?
It pretty much breaks down on party lines of the issues of what you would expect. But I want to kind of return to what the recent discussion there. And first, I do want to say, I don't know. So we have, between the House and Senate, we have 17 members that we cover, and I don't know how the stars aligned, but I got all 17 for this weekend story. Wow. So yeah, anyway, but I noticed at least 3 or 4 of the Republicans, and I know Erin wrote a story about this last week, but they're referencing, so we asked their top 2 priorities is how we did frame this, James. And what they offered, 3 of them or 4 of them offered was emergency power limitations. So they're basically talking to Kim Reynolds, who's a member of their same party. None of them mentioned her by name, but they talked about executive orders. And one of them, Zach Whiting, from up in far northwest Iowa, talked about wanting limits and balances, remedies for people, businesses, and churches, quote, affected by executive overreach, concerned about those executive powers. And then Skylar Wheeler, a few others had similar wordings with that. So that's a very interesting dynamic where they're calling out, the person of the executive of their own party for, all these things that you did. And people will certainly debate whether it was enough or whether it was or wasn't enough, going back to May and how quickly some things came off and how things came back on and, all that. But there's some people, Republicans, who want to talk about that as an issue. So I wanted to throw that out
and to add to that, we asked Pat Grassley and Jack Whitfer about that this week, knowing that they were getting those questions from within their caucus. And to Brett's point, it's kind of an interesting dynamic because those two are clearly wanting to play nice with the governor, the member of their own party, while also, being receptive or responsive to the members of their caucus. But if they're leaning one way or the other right now, I think it's safe to say, based on what we heard this week, there was a lot of praise for and deference to the governor and her handling of the pandemic from Jack Whitford and Pat Grassley. And they both kind of said, in the middle, while we're still going through the pandemic, we don't think that's the right time to, be changing the process or rewriting laws. So I don't expect anything this session. Maybe next year, with everything in the rearview mirror, they'll revisit that, they said, but it sounds like they're not excited about entertaining that kind of a proposal this year.
Yeah.
And back to what, just some of the things that were offered up. The thing for like bipartisan type issues, broadband internet expansion was raised by several people, both Republicans and Democrats. Education, as always, is a top thing for Democrats. But the difference of a Democrat would be how they approach education is to ensure sufficient funding, whereas we have some Republicans who are talking about school choice and vouchers and that sort of thing. So those things will play out. Just a few others to throw out was taxes. Republicans are talking about taxes. And Republicans talking about a state constitutional amendment for abortion. And then the last thing I want to throw out, I got a kick out of this. Dennis Bush is a new House representative from Cherokee, Iowa. And I had covered him, coincidentally, there was a crack up of one of the mental health regions up here of counties moving from county to county. And I went and covered a couple of those meetings probably 2 years ago. And he was a county supervisor at that time. And so anyway, for his priorities, he talked about the mental health regions. And he has had the way he responded was just very, I guess, grassroots and, focus, I guess, like a meat and potatoes type, like a table type thing, like not like the overarching thing that, maybe not the platitudes that you might get, the expected stuff like. So he had seen that. He had seen the impact, and instead of saying property taxes or education, like he wanted to focus on that. And I thought that was very refreshing.
Interesting. Tom, are you getting any sense from folks in your area about, whether they're, what their priorities are? Are they other than what each party's priorities are? Anybody making any significant claims to get something done?
Yeah, unfortunately, I've been so preoccupied with following up on the violence that happened at the Capitol on Wednesday, and following the developments of what's going to happen with the 2nd District congressional seat, that I actually really haven't reached out to them to see what their priorities are. But Bret mentioned broadband. I am working on an article this weekend, and there is bipartisan support. Both Republicans and Democrats in the legislature say that they plan to pay special focus on bridging the state's so-called digital divide, pushing forward additional funding and legislation to facilitate continued expansion of high-speed broadband internet access, with more and more Iowans working and learning from home and accessing medical care online. House Speaker Pat Grassley did set up a new House IT committee to specifically look at issues related to broadband, but information technology in general, but with the big focus there on broadband. And we did see a big focus from the governor last session in her proposed budget. I can't remember the exact funding amount that she pushed forward, but she was asking for, was it? Okay. Anyway, she was asking for a lot of funding for broadband last year, and expected to do so again this year, and to be part of her condition of the state address, probably, is what legislators are telling me.
Great, thanks. Todd, as the legislature meets in a pandemic and at the start of a campaign cycle that includes a race for governor. Should Iowans be optimistic?
No.
Okay.
No, it depends on where you're at. I mean, if you're a Republican, then you can be optimistic about this legislative session because you control everything and they'll be able to do whatever they want. If you're outside of the Republican Party, it's probably going to be another legislative session where you're slapping your face a lot, just sort of smack my head kind of session. Why are they doing this? Why is this a problem? We've
So
seen
business
it
as
for
usual.
years. Yeah, business as usual, sad trombone.
All right. Well, that's it for this edition of On Iowa Politics. I hope it was worth your time. If you liked it, tell a friend and subscribe to us on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you find your podcast. Fan mail may be sent to podcast@thegazette.com, and you can find us on the homepages of the Quad City Time, Sioux City Journal, Muscatine Journal, Mason City Globe Gazette, Waterloo, Cedar Falls Courier, and the Cedar Rapids Gazette. For Bret, Tom, Erin, Todd, I'm James Lynch. Thanks for listening and stay well.